Welcome back, everyone. This is Angel Miller with peopleofshambhala.com, and this evening we're going to be speaking with William Kiesel. He's the publisher behind Ourobors Press. He's also the founder of the Seattle Esoteric Book Conference, and he's a co-editor of Clavis Journal, which explores Western esotericism, the occult, and spirituality more broadly. William Kiesel, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Angel. I really appreciate you having me on. It's a pleasure to speak with you.
Oh, and with you, definitely. And you're the publisher behind Ourobors Press, which has steadily grown in reputation over the last few years for exquisitely created books, especially on the esoteric. So we're going to get to that, but perhaps you could just give us a little bit about your background and how you got into this pretty unusual field in this day and age.
Sure. Well, I was always attracted to books from a young age, and of course studying the esoteric was something that I was attracted to quite young as well. I spent some time with the Theosophical Society when I was a teenager. It's where I learned my manners when I care to use them. But I've always been fascinated by books and book culture, and I was obsessed with understanding how books were made, materials that were used in books, and of course just research and history in general was always of interest. And I began collecting esoteric books when I was a teenager. I was still in high school. Uh-huh. My family were all readers, and a lot of my uncles would pass books down to me after they'd read them. And by the time I was in high school, I had quite a nice collection of literature and some things, and
yeah,
I realized that I could trade these at other bookstores. I began visiting all the used and antiquarian bookstores in my hometown, which is Seattle.
Okay. Yeah.
And back then there were, let me tell you, quite a few. There's not as many today, but back then there were many bookstores, and I had trade credit in a lot of them, and so I spent a lot of time haunting those bookstores, and also spending a lot of time in the University of Washington libraries.
Okay.
There's 11 libraries on that campus, and quite a lot of material. And I think some of my early exposure to the kinds of materials that I'm publishing now came about when I was visiting special collections at the university.
Okay.
And yeah, it was one of those things where my curiosity in the subject and my fascination in the object of the book just obsessed me for quite a number of years.
Yeah.
It led me to want to get into the book field.
Okay.
And so I spent time as a librarian at the Theosophical Society.
Oh, okay.
I spent time as a librarian at a local private library called the Seattle Metaphysical Library.
Okay.
And also became an apprentice bookbinder under Joel Radcliffe of Ars Obscura Bookbinding.
Okay.
And that's really where I got my start. Working with Radcliffe. He's probably the hardest working man I've ever met in my life. He doesn't ever stop working. He works all the time.
Mm.
He loves his job. I mean, he just loves what he does. And he was doing some esoteric publishing in the early 90s, and even before that, in the 80s, he was involved with a small press called Acorn Press, which came out of Canada.
Okay.
And for a while was here in Seattle, and it was a small letterpress operation. And so he did that and bindings for a number of years, and when I met him, I think I met him when I was 18 or 19, and I had been collecting his books for a while, and a mutual friend of ours just told me I should call him up because he was always interested in, finding out more people who were interested in his work, and so we met, and I did some binding with him, and it was really a great experience to be able to understand how a book is made, and be exposed to the tools, the terminology, and also that old world craft, because not only books were being manufactured by this man's hands, but he also made boots, Civil War era boots, and knives as well. So,
really?
Books, boots, and blades. That was Radcliffe, and he himself also. The kinds of materials that he was publishing and binding usually were related to witchcraft or the occult.
Oh, really? Okay.
And when I was apprenticing with him, he was working with James Banner of Trident Books, and so I saw a lot of that material being bound up, as well as one of the nicer things I was working on when I was his apprentice was a book called The Psalms of the Heretic, which was a collection of Sufi poetry by Monir Hanafi, who was a local Sufi occult fellow who's sadly passed, but exceptional gentleman. So the binding, and Radcliffe encouraged me, because of my research at the university. I was always pulling alchemical manuscripts out,
right?
Getting facsimiles of things made, scans of manuscripts, and what have you.
Okay.
So he was encouraging me to get into publishing, and eventually I did, and I started with Gayat al-Hakim, which is the first English translation of the Picatrix.
Right. Yeah.
So today, I mean, it's been 12 years since that first book, and I've done a number of other titles, mostly in the Western esoteric tradition. A lot of them embrace alchemy. I like the old world typography. I try to present the volumes the way that they would have been set during the Renaissance, when they were originally penned. Go ahead.
And is the type actually letterpress, or the letterpress is just for the cover?
For the trade editions, the dust jackets are letterpress printed, but no, the text itself it's not handset letterpress. That would be
that would be extremely time consuming.
Time consuming and quite expensive to do, although it has been done. I mean, one of the early esoteric presses that I consider to be an inspiration for Ouroboros Press was Daniel Driscoll's Heptangle Books.
Okay.
And he did letterpress printed occult books and bound them himself, and he had a press set up in his basement and just did really nice work. He wasn't hand setting the type. It was a linotype machine he used, which allowed him to set entire pages. Still very detail oriented work and time consumptive, and it yields beautiful results. Really beautiful results. And really, for what he was doing, the prices he was charging, unbelievably cheap. I don't know how he was doing it, but it could be that money wasn't really an option, wasn't it?
Right. Yeah, I would think so. Yeah, I'm not really aware of many of the presses that you mentioned. I didn't really know there was quite such in a way, a kind of scene around sort of classically printed and created books. And why do you think it's become we're getting a lot of attention over the last few years anyway, especially today with it's sort of the Twitter world that we live in, where everything is very fleeting. because these books are designed to look beautiful and to remain for a long time, and they're in a way they're works of art as well, right? I mean, probably some of the material is out there anyway, but it's put together in such a way that it's extremely classical, really.
Sure. Well, I think there's a number of things going on with that. In terms of the materials, I think that, you know, we're still capable of creating objects of art, and there's an experience to be had when you're holding a book itself.
Yeah.
It's true that you can acquire some of these texts online or through digital PDFs, and that makes research very convenient. But the pleasure of reading, the experience of having a body of knowledge in a form commensurate with the ideals behind the text is something I think a lot of people who are esoteric book collectors appreciate. The funny thing is, just in the occult world, it's almost a given that if you're studying the occult that you're a book collector. It's not true. It's not totally true 100% across the board, but I've found in my years of being in the book trade that a lot of people who are interested in these subjects are also interested in books just as objects themselves. And I think that with the ubiquity of the internet and the availability of information, it really just behooves printers and publishers to try to do their best, if they're going to print a volume, to make it as nice as possible, because otherwise it's what's the value, you know, besides just the information itself. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I've seen many, especially Masonic books from the 1800s, and the work that went into them, it was really quite something, with multiple color pages at the beginning and things like this. But I mean, it seems like the knowledge that's in a lot of esoteric books and old manuscripts and this sort of thing, it's definitely a good thing that it can be presented in a more serious manner, because I think too much of the information we get today is presented in such a way that it doesn't really make you take it very seriously, particularly.
It's true, and you mentioned Twitter, and I can't concur with you more in terms of these little snapshots or these sound bites that people are getting accustomed to, these little snippets. You can see this reflected in film as well. I mean, the way they make today, it's all these cut-up shots, and it's the attention span that people have is shifting as a result of it. And I think that the idea of sitting down with a book and having that experience allows you an opportunity to experience a more fulfilling reflection, if you will. I mean, as opposed to these flickering images that just go by in this endless stream.
Yeah, and I think to points to be made regarding Twitter, you come across people that have 50,000 followers, but I'm sure that almost none of them are actually taking any notice of what's being said. I think that people follow each other and then never look at what's being tweeted anyway. But I mean, I certainly remember myself when I was buying books, especially many years ago in my youth, that I would even like the smell of paper and the smell of books, which you certainly don't get that experience with the net or anything, which is a great thing, but it's a completely different experience.
I agree. It's true, and it's funny. People ask me what my opinion is of digital texts, and I like to point out that that's what they are. They're digital texts, not digital books, because they're different kinds of technology. Just as a scroll is not a book, same goes with a digital text is not a book. They're all three of those things: scrolls, books, and the digital media are a means whereby text may be stored, but books have been proven to be a successful technology. I've got books that still work that are 500 years old, and I'll be interested to see a Kindle work in 500 years.
Yeah, that's right, absolutely. Yeah. So, and how long? I guess it varies, but how long does it take to put a book together? Because I mean, quite a lot goes into it. Perhaps you could just talk about that a little bit.
Sure. Well, it really does depend on the project.
Yeah.
Some things require a lot of editing.
Yeah.
Or even research before you even get to the editing stage. And so that can be quite consumptive, time consumptive. The production time, often, again, it just depends on what it is that you're producing and how you're producing it. The size of a book can affect that, whether or not you're having special bindings made.
Right.
And the special bindings that Ourobors Press produces are hand-bound, so it's being done with antique equipment and all being done manually. So
yeah,
it's not as quick as, say, an offset press that can print 1,000 sheets quite swiftly. But it's, there's so many things involved. There's the marketing and the of course the shipping and all of these things that go into it. So it does vary. I mean, some books require years of work. Some books just a few months. It really just depends. If there's translation involved, that adds time. If it's a living author you're working with, that involves more time. If there's variations of the text, it might require some extensive research. So, waiting on institutions to supply you with illustrations or photographs of manuscripts can sometimes be a lengthy process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you mentioned marketing as well, and it seems almost incongruous in a way, that because the books that you create are maybe leather bound and embossed, or various sort of techniques that you really don't see in the book world anymore. And how do you find marketing your books in this day and age with the kind of book that you create?
Well, one thing that's really great is we have a dedicated readership. Okay. So a lot of the deluxe editions that we do, they're purchased by the same people that bought the last one that we did. And,
yeah.
And part of this, I was very fortunate to work in the book trade. So many years of antiquarian bookselling allowed me the opportunity to know other esoteric dealers. So when I was starting, when the internet was still quite in its infancy in terms of websites and that sort of thing, it was very slow going back then.
Yeah.
I would have to make phone calls, just dead phone calls across the United States, trying to connect with esoteric shops around, hoping that they would be interested. And it wasn't, a lot of those shops were accustomed to carrying things that were produced by, say, Weiser Books or Llewellyn, and some of the older, more, trade book publishers that had distribution. But doing a small individual press like Ouroboros back then, it was quite difficult to convince somebody on a phone when you couldn't just email them.
Right.
It was expensive. It was expensive, even just to have a photograph made of the book would sometimes, it just took time. And then if you sent them the photo
that didn't guarantee a sale. So part of it for me was easy because of my antiquarian experience. I knew that there were some antiquarian dealers who were interested in fine books.
Yeah.
So I was able to do it in that way, and also my own interest in books over the years. I sort of just did what I wanted as a collector, and so I try to put myself in the collector's shoes and go, okay, where would I look to find this? How would I get my hands on this kind of material, and then create opportunity for that to happen? Incidentally, one of the things I'm working on right now is I'm writing a syllabus for a class I intend to teach on occult book collecting.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, it's something that I've been wanting to do for a number of years, and finding that my attention is being turned in that direction. A lot of people ask me, the values of esoteric books, or how to find certain kinds of books, or so these different questions come up, and just again with my background in antiquarian books, particularly with my interest in occult books,
yeah,
I have a lot of information that I could share with people that would be helpful for them, both just in the sense of being a collector, or if you wanted to get into the business of buying and selling rare.
Right.
So that's something I'm working on as well. It's such a vast field, antiquarian books, and not all of us booksellers can know it all. So I'm always looking out for new information or things like that. So it's just interesting.
Yeah, yeah, indeed. And perhaps you could just talk a little bit about some of the projects you've worked on, because you have quite a range of books. Many of them are related to Rosicrucianism or alchemy or magic. And,
Sure.
And these must be pretty interesting projects to work on. I'm sort of reminded of that movie, The Ninth Gate, by Roman Polanski a little bit.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I remember when it came out, some friends said, "Oh, you have to see this movie. They made a movie about you." And
yeah, that's right.
of course, when I saw it, I was a little horrified because Johnny Depp's character, right in the opening scene, is ripping off somebody, doing this buy and misleading the people. But it's a fun film. But yeah, I've really had the great fortune of being able to visit a lot of very interesting collections of esoterica, both in institutions like the University of Washington, or the Bibliotheca Philosophia Hermetica in Amsterdam is overwhelmingly good collection when it comes to Gnosticism, alchemy, mysticism, and that sort of thing. It's a fantastic resource. Yeah. So the material itself for me is just a joy. I mean, it's really how I got into publishing. I was reading in that area and just would see references to books that were unavailable that I wanted to read. Right. And so I would just turn my attention to getting as much information as I could, and sometimes locating copies and trying to make it happen. One of the things that I really wanted to do early on and wasn't able to do until many years later was the Theatrum Chemicum Britannicum.
Right.
And this book for me is really one of the most important texts that Ourobors Press has produced, because it's a significant contribution to the literature, not only in terms of English alchemical texts, which are not easy to come by, but this particular collection of alchemical texts were gathered together by Elias Ashmole, who was one of the founders of the Royal Society.
Yeah.
Among other things, he's quite a famous gentleman. And I really feel like the work that what he was doing in the 17th century is very similar to what I do today, in terms of trying to preserve these traditions, trying to make this material that's quite difficult to get a hold of sometimes available to people. The Rosicrucian manifestos, again, it's just another circumstance where it's source material that I'm trying to make available to people so that they can do their own research or follow trains of thought in historical contexts. As you mentioned earlier, there's a lot of new esoteric publishing going on. We've seen a lot of it going on in the last, maybe 6 years or so. And much of it has to do with contemporary occultism. There's quite a variety of material, modern material coming out, which is interesting. But I choose to focus on mostly historical contexts. So the most recent book I did is a modern art book, The Occult Calligraphy by Hagen von Tullian.
Right. That's a very curious-looking work. And can you just explain what calligraphy is?
Yeah, calligraphy is just Latin for paper cuts.
Okay.
And when I say paper cuts, I'm speaking of a variety of different kinds of ornamental craft.
Yeah.
Similar to, say, the snowflakes that you see around the holidays, or even valentines, the lacy paper-cut valentines, which derived originally from fractures, which were decorative, sort of letters of endearment that the early Pennsylvania Dutch tradition that they had, and they would give to their loved ones on special occasions. And,
and I think paper cutting may be kind of misleading, and what people might think. I mean, it has a kind of modern style. It looks a bit like Shepherd Fairey's Obey campaigns, a little bit, but there are a bit like nuns and skeletons and images of Kali and things like this, and it's pretty unique work, I would say.
Yeah, the thing I like about Hagen's work, aside from the fact that he really has a really great design sense, but his work also spans a number of cultures.
Right.
He's a practicing occultist and Buddhan practitioner. He's in the Fraternitas Saturni, which is a German esoteric organization. And so, in looking at these cuts, you can see that there's Far Eastern, there's Voodoo influences, there's Hindu influences, Gnostic influences, and Thelemic influences, and
right.
I really like the diversity of it. I like the fact that, like for instance, there's a section in the book called "The Custodians of Death," and what he did was he created different archetypes based on the different traditions, death in the different traditions. So you've got representations of Kali and different Thanatos imagery. And he's so prolific that I really wanted to, with the book, have an opportunity to show off the great number of cuts that he's done. He's used quite a few, and they're beautifully done.
Yeah, absolutely. And so what are some of the more unusual projects that you've worked on, do you think, or more stimulating ones?
Well, I think the Theatrum Chemicum Britannicum was really one of the most stimulating because it was a 4-year production.
Oh, really? Wow.
It really required a lot of research. We entirely reset the type. There was a facsimile done of that book back in the late 60s, and it was just a quite a poor quality photographic reproduction. The publishers couldn't be faulted for back then because the state of the technology back then didn't really allow for higher resolution scanning. But the thing that I always sort of was dismayed about facsimiles of that nature was the fact that, well, the typeface was difficult to read, and they also didn't correct the errors. The Ashmole provided 2 errata sheets for that book at the end of the volume, and I just thought, for such a monumental work by such a respected figure, to reproduce it in later days and not make those corrections just seemed wrong to me.
Yeah, absolutely.
And again, sometimes finance has to come into these considerations. I mean, some form of reproduction is better than none, but when I was approaching the project, I really felt that if I was going to do this, I didn't want to just make a facsimile. I wanted to reproduce the work in a way that would be as close to how Ashmole himself would appreciate it. And I did a lot of research on the manuscripts, the original manuscripts that Ashmole used for his edition, because, of course, many of them are in the British Library or the Ashmolean and the Bodleian. And when I was also, in order to reproduce the engravings in that book, the quality of the engravings in the Ouroboros edition is quite high because we had 1200 DPI scans made. Oh, really? Okay. And it was from a copy owned by Isaac Newton, curiously enough. Oh, really? Wow. And these are the kinds of interesting things that came up when I was working on that project. Another one that was really fascinating to work on was Zoroaster's Telescope, which is kind of an odd little book of divination. Yeah. It has a folding plate in the front showing these hexagonal tiles that are used in this divination text, and that was a book that I'd seen the illustrations from for many years, but didn't really know what it was, or could never locate the actual text. And I remember the day that I discovered that it was reprinted in Schiebel's Das Kloster, which is a 12-volume set on German folk tales and folklore. I found this out, and the next day, a friend called me up and said, "Oh, I'm going to be in the Cleveland Public Library. Anything there you need me to check out?" And as it turned out, they had a copy of that set, and so he was able to go in there and have it photographed for me.
Oh, great! Wonderful.
Yeah. So. These things just come up sometimes. Yeah. Things that are intriguing.
Yeah, and so another thing that you're involved with, and really the person behind, is the Esoteric Book Conference. Perhaps you could just talk a little bit about that.
Oh, sure. Well, the book conference, we're about to move into our 6th year here in September. 6th and 7th. Every year we get together. I've invited other esoteric publishers to come and show their work. Yeah. And I invite guest speakers from around the world to give presentations. And the focus is on esoteric book culture. And sometimes that's historical, sometimes it has to do with the books themselves, sometimes it has to do with more practical matters, but really it's a great opportunity for people to see what's going on in publishing, the esoteric publishing world today. A lot of publishers come and they'll launch new titles at the event. Yeah. And the book fair is just phenomenal. There's new and used and antiquarian books covering every range of esoteric subject you can imagine. From, early cuneiform translations to Austin Osman Spare texts to grimoires. it's just really a great opportunity to meet other people who are researching or working in this field. We have a small art fair, esoteric art fair, showcasing artists who are working today whose work has been used in contemporary publishing. And it's a convivial crowd, real convivial crowd.
That's good. And, we've been talking a lot about using books and manuscripts from the past, but also there seems to be a pretty lively scene of maybe lesser known but serious authors and artists and people like this that are sort of around this scene as well.
It's true. There's there's quite a few regulars who show up every year, and then each year we have been noticing more people coming, and it's really great, to have the opportunity to stand in one room and see so much variety in esoteric publishing. And also have the opportunity to speak to the publishers and to speak to the authors and sometimes even speak to the binders, the book binders.
Oh, really?
It's really it's a great event. The speakers have been great every year. We've had some really wonderful talks. Sometimes we have panels as well.
Okay.
Yeah, I really look forward to it. I look forward to it every year, and this year we're having it at the University of Washington, which is a new venue for us. But I think it's a good opportunity because, we've just close to the libraries. There's 11 libraries on that campus, and I'm sure people love to have the opportunity to look at some of the material that's there as well.
Yeah, and this is the University of Washington in Seattle, right?
That's right.
Okay, and what is the date for that?
It's September 6th and 7th.
Okay, great. And if people want to find out more about the book conference, they should go to...
Oh, sure. We have a website, esotericbookconference.com.
Okay, great. Excellent. And that's before we wrap up. Is there anything else you'd like to mention, or?
Well, I think that sounds like it's a good amount. If people have questions or are interested in what I do, they can look at my website, which is bookarts.org.
Great.
And that's the Ourobors Press website. I should mention also that I'm the co-editor for Clavis, which is the Journal of Occult Arts, Letters, and Experience. Co-editing that with Daniel Schulke, who's the director of Zoanon and Three Hands Press. I probably should mention that because we have our third volume coming out this September.
Okay, great.
And I like to encourage people to look at that because it's really a great collection of texts. We have some older texts, we have some contemporary scholarship there, and it's always filled with wonderful art. So check out clavisjournal.com as well. That's another project that I'm involved in that is worth knowing about.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for coming along and talking to us about your publishing and other ventures. It was excellent.